back to our channel on this beautiful day. We are thrilled to bring you the latest, most intense deep dive into the complex lives of your favorite Genoa City residents. Let us unravel the psychological warfare currently gripping the Newman Empire. The Newman legacy is built on a foundation of absolute control, a towering monument to the sheer, unyielding will of its patriarch. For Victor Newman, the mere concept of an abbot infiltrating his inner sanctum is not just an insult. It is a virulent poison that must be surgically extracted before it can infect the lifeblood of his empire. The simmering, forbidden romance between his daughter, Victoria, and Kyle Abbott has ignited a dormant, terrifying paranoia within the Newman patriarch. He views Kyle not as a suitor, but as a Trojan horse, a living embodiment of the decades-long Abbott rivalry designed to dismantle the Newman legacy from the inside out. Victor's mind, always operating several moves ahead on a three-dimensional chessboard, immediately begins to formulate a ruthless strategy to sever this toxic attachment without leaving his own fingerprints on the blade. To execute a flawless emotional assassination, Victor requires a proxy, a willing pawn who is entirely unaware of the invisible strings attached to his limbs. He scans the emotional landscape of Genoa City and locks his predatory gaze onto Nate Hastings. Victor possesses a terrifying ability to identify the precise vulnerabilities in those around him, and he knows that Nate is currently nursing a profound, bleeding psychological wound. Having recently discovered the illicit, passionate connection between Victoria and Kyle, Nate is a man drowning in a sea of humiliation and shattered pride. Victor recognizes that a man with a broken heart and a bruised ego is the most dangerous weapon imaginable, provided he is pointed in the right direction and given a righteous cause to fight for. The clandestine meeting between the Newman patriarch and the former surgeon is a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Victor does not issue commands. Instead, he carefully cultivates an atmosphere of mutual concern, framing his insidious agenda as paternal worry. He slowly, deliberately feeds Nate a meticulously crafted narrative, suggesting that Victoria is merely lost in a fog of corporate stress and emotional confusion. Victor paints Kyle as a predatory opportunist, a chaotic force taking advantage of Victoria's temporary vulnerability. By doing so, Victor subtly absolves Victoria of her betrayal in Nate's eyes, transferring the entirety of the blame onto the Abbott heir, and offering Nate a convenient, comforting delusion to cling to. The true brilliance of Victor's manipulation lies in his ability to weaponize Nate's lingering affection. He softly insinuates that Victoria still harbors deep, unresolved feelings for Nate, suggesting that her current erratic behavior is nothing more than a desperate cry for stability. Victor promises Nate that a triumphant, powerful resurgence in his corporate career will serve as the ultimate beacon, guiding a lost Victoria back to the safety of his arms. He strokes Nate's ego with surgical precision, elevating him from the role of a discarded lover to that of a necessary savior, the only man capable of rescuing the Newman heiress from the brink of absolute ruin. Nate absorbs this toxic narrative like a parched man drinking from a poisoned well. The psychological shift within him is instantaneous and profound. He sheds the paralyzing cloak of humiliation and dons the shining armor of a righteous protector. He genuinely believes he is embarking on a noble crusade, entirely blind to the reality that he is merely a disposable instrument in a much larger, darker war. Nate convinces himself that his actions are driven by pure love and a moral obligation to protect Victoria from Kyle's destructive Abbott influence, completely failing to realize that his newfound purpose has been artificially implanted by the most ruthless manipulator in Genoa City. Armed with this delusional sense of purpose, Nate begins a calculated, systematic encroachment into Victoria's daily existence. He does not attack directly. Instead, he orchestrates a suffocating omnipresence. He ensures that their professional orbits constantly intersect, using corporate synergy as a flawless disguise for emotional surveillance. Nate is always there, anticipating her professional needs, offering a calm, steadying presence that stands in stark, deliberate contrast to the chaotic, forbidden thrill of her secret liaisons with Kyle. He believes he is building a fortress of safety around her, unaware that he is actually constructing the walls of a new, invisible prison. Victoria finds herself trapped in a suffocating psychological vice, caught between the intoxicating danger of her romance with Kyle and the sudden, overwhelming re-emergence of Nate in her life. She is profoundly confused by Nate's sudden attentiveness, feeling the heavy, unspoken expectations behind his every kind gesture. The air around her grows thick with tension as she senses that she is being managed, handled like a fragile corporate asset rather than a woman capable of making her own choices. The emotional whiplash of navigating Kyle's intense passion and Nate's calculated protection begins to wear down her defenses, leaving her feeling isolated and profoundly exhausted. Sensing that the psychological pressure is reaching a critical threshold, Victor decides to escalate his offensive, stepping out of the shadows to deliver a devastating, direct blow. He summons Victoria to his office, the very epicenter of his power, and issues a chilling, unequivocal ultimatum that freezes the blood in her veins. He strips away any pretense of paternal warmth, transforming into the cold, ruthless corporate titan who built an empire on the ashes of his enemies. Victor looks his daughter in the eye and promises to strip her of her position, her power, and her legacy at Newman Enterprises if she continues to intertwine her fate with an abbot. The sheer brutality of Victor's threat shatters Victoria's fragile sense of autonomy. This is not merely a disagreement over a romantic partner, it is a fundamental attack on her identity and the sacrifices she has made to secure her place on the Newman throne. The psychological cruelty of forcing her to choose between the only genuine, passionate connection she has felt in years and the empire she was bred to rule is a wound that cuts to the bone. Victoria realizes, with horrifying clarity, that her father views her not as a daughter deserving of happiness, but as a vital piece of corporate machinery that must be controlled at all costs. From the periphery, Kyle watches this intricate, toxic dance unfold, his inherent abbot pride flaring into a blinding rage. He is no fool. He recognizes the distinct, suffocating fingerprints of Victor Newman all over Nate's sudden resurgence. Kyle sees through Nate's polite, professional veneer, identifying him for exactly what he is, a proxy warrior fighting a proxy war. The realization that Victor is actively manipulating the emotional landscape to drive a wedge between him and Victoria ignites a territorial fury within Kyle, pushing him dangerously close to the edge of his own self-control. Kyle is already balancing on a razor-thin wire, consumed by the agonizing reality of his mother's psychological collapse and his own burning desire to make Victor pay for his past sins. Now, witnessing Nate act as Victor's self-appointed guard dog is an insult he simply cannot swallow. Kyle feels that the genuine, raw connection he shares with Victoria is being cheapened, commodified, and manipulated by external forces who view their romance as nothing more than a strategic vulnerability. The brewing storm of jealousy and defiance within Kyle begins to eclipse his rational judgment. The atmosphere whenever Kyle and Nate occupy the same space becomes incredibly volatile, crackling with an unspoken, venomous rivalry. Every corporate exchange is laced with hidden threats, every polite smile masking a deep-seated desire to destroy the other. Nate's smug, self-righteous demeanor, fueled by his delusional belief that he is Victoria's ultimate savior, acts as a highly combustible accelerant to Kyle's burning rage. The two men are locked in a silent, psychological deathmatch, circling each other like predators, waiting for the slightest sign of weakness to strike a fatal blow. The inevitable explosion finally shatters the polite veneer of their corporate environment, erupting into a visceral, highly public confrontation that leaves the bystanders breathless. Kyle, unable to contain the boiling pressure any longer, corners Nate, stripping away all pretense of civility. He launches a blistering verbal assault, accusing Nate of being a pathetic, spineless pawn who is entirely blinded by a delusional savior complex. Kyle ruthlessly exposes Nate's actions as nothing more than the desperate flailing of a discarded lover who is allowing himself to be weaponized by Victor Newman. Nate, his pride deeply wounded by Kyle's accurate, piercing accusations, retaliates with equal ferocity and a desperate need to validate his own existence in this twisted triangle. He attempts to seize the moral high ground, loudly citing Kyle's destructive history, the endless scandals surrounding the Abbott family, and the inherent, historical toxicity of the Abbott-Newman dynamic. Nate desperately tries to project an aura of unshakable strength, insisting with a trembling voice that he is acting out of genuine care and profound concern for Victoria's well-being. But his defensive words ring hollow against the undeniable, glaring truth of Victor's manipulation, exposing the fragile ego hiding beneath his righteous facade. The public spectacle serves only to highlight the absolute absurdity of their war, two proud, Stubborn men fighting for dominance and control over a woman who is desperately trying to reclaim her own agency from a world determined to silence her. The aftermath of the violent confrontation leaves a scorched, desolate emotional landscape in its wake, with relationships fractured beyond immediate repair. The psychological wreckage is immense, and Victoria finds herself standing entirely alone at the very epicenter of the devastation. She is profoundly humiliated by the public spectacle, a bitter reminder that her private life is constantly subjected to public consumption and corporate maneuvering. She realizes with a sickening, paralyzing clarity that she has been reduced to a mere prize to be won, a strategic pawn to be sacrificed in a bitter, endless war between the men who claim to care for her. The fragile illusion of her independence, the autonomy she fought so fiercely to establish, has been violently shattered, replaced by the crushing, inescapable reality of her father's omnipresent, suffocating control over every aspect of her existence. High above the emotional carnage, in the silent, imposing sanctuary of his executive office, Victor Newman watches the fallout with a cold, calculating, and deeply unsettling satisfaction. The master manipulator has successfully pulled the invisible strings, and his unwitting marionettes have danced perfectly to his destructive, discordant tune. He has successfully driven a massive, jagged wedge between the forbidden lovers, weaponized a broken man's fragile ego, and ruthlessly reasserted his absolute, unquestionable dominance over his daughter's personal and professional life. And he has accomplished all of this devastation without ever officially stepping onto the battlefield himself, keeping his hands entirely clean while the world around him burns. The chilling perfection of his manipulation is a terrifying testament to his unchecked power and his unwavering belief that the ends will always justify his cruelest means. As the dust settles on the shattered remnants of their lives, the true cost of this psychological warfare remains to be seen. Victoria is trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by men who wish to control her, protect her, or possess her, while the one man she truly desires is being systematically destroyed by her own father. With her legacy held hostage and her heart under siege, a terrifying uncertainty looms over the Newman Empire. As the walls close in, and the men around her fight for absolute control of her destiny, will Victoria finally find the strength to break free from her father's toxic, suffocating grip, or will the crushing weight of the Newman legacy force her to sacrifice the only genuine passion she has left?